What is up, guys? So lately I've been noticing the similarities between the Arrowverse and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They are both superhero universes where it started with just one hero, then it expanded into other heroes having their own franchises, then those heroes come together, and then that all culminates into this big finale where that original hero dies while the universe or even the multiverse is at stake. Now, the similarities do go on beyond that. There are a lot of similarities between these two universes, but the biggest, I think, difference is that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was more planned out and it was better structured. The pacing of the universe is significantly better, which got me thinking what the Arrowverse would have looked like if it had that better pacing and maybe even slightly higher budget, because the Marvel Cinematic Universe obviously has a much higher budget than the Arrowverse. So it got me thinking what the Arrowverse would have looked like. Now keep in mind, this is with the benefit of hindsight, so we already know everything that's already happened in the Arrowverse and what we could skip and what we could keep. So this is probably not what it would have ended up looking like even if they had done this from the beginning. This is just what I think it would look like based off of what we got from the Arrowverse if it just had been in a better structure like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I'm going to be going over every single MCU movie, going over the Arrowverse counterpart for that movie, and basically everything we would have skipped had it been in the Marvel Cinematic Universe structure and all the differences to those movies. Now, I have done this before with the entire Arrowverse, but this is going to be going into more detail. It's also more of an updated version, and I'm going to be going over Phase 1 first, then in subsequent videos, Phase 2 and Phase 3. With that in mind, let's begin. So the first MCU movie and the first movie in Phase 1 is Iron Man, the first Iron Man movie and the first movie that kicked it all off. And obviously I think the counterpart for the Arrowverse would have to be taking from Arrow Season 1. It would be a movie, obviously. This is talking about like if the Arrowverse was a movie franchise and how it would have looked. So this would be a movie that takes story elements from Arrow Season 1. The main villain would be the Dark Archer. The supporting characters would mostly be the same, with their introductions being a little bit different. Obviously, there's not enough time for characters like the Huntress or Deadshot and characters like that, and characters like Roy Harper would be implemented in a different way. Like I would say Thea was already dating him from before Oliver came back, because there's no time to have that entire storyline in just a movie with everything else going on. So they're already dating by the time Oliver comes around, but the whole story with Oliver saving Roy and then Roy becoming Speedy or becoming indebted to the Hood, that would happen as well. Although it would be a little bit different to fit better with the storyline of the season, have it connect to the Dark Archer storyline, and replace the villain of that episode with a named villain, specifically I would say Count Vertigo, who is one of the more famous, more popular Green Arrow villains. He would never be the main villain of any of these movies, since he was never the main villain of any seasons of Arrow, but I would give him a role in this movie, and maybe even in the next one, as a secondary villain, a secondary main villain, who was maybe hired by the Dark Archer potentially to distract Oliver by kidnapping Roy. That would then lead directly into the end of the season, which is Sacrifice. So the episodes of this season, or this movie, would focus on our Pilot, Year's End, The Odyssey, Salvation, and Sacrifice, scrunched down into one movie, with obviously elements of those episodes taken out, but also elements of other episodes put in. So the next movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe was The Incredible Hulk, and the Arrowverse has a counterpart that fits just a little bit too well. It's a movie that never got a sequel, a movie that never had a follow-up, and the Arrowverse has something similar. Constantine never had a second season, only one season, with the character himself appearing in other shows, like Hulk appears in Thor, and also obviously the Avengers. Constantine later appeared in Legends of Tomorrow, as well as the crossovers occasionally. So the counterpart to the Incredible Hulk would be Constantine, and the changes to Season 1 would not exactly be significant, because the season itself was mostly just a filler episode after a filler episode. It only had a couple episodes of story, and one of those episodes never aired, and that's the finale. So the biggest difference would be that the finale does air. The events of the finale, where Constantine goes up against Manny, the villain of who would have been the villain of the season, and defeats him, as well as some story elements event involving Jim Corrigan becoming the Spectre. This is something that is actually pretty crazy to me, but the first two movies of the Arrowverse's cinematic universe would actually kind of both tie into the Crisis, as Arrow would introduce Lila Michaels, which would be more significant in a universe that is cinematic, because we never thought that this would lead to the Crisis, but if in a movie universe, introducing a character like Lila Michaels, it is a teaser for what's to come, and introducing the Spectre is also a little bit similar because both of those characters have humongous roles in Crisis on Infinite Earths. So this Constantine movie would introduce Jim Corrigan, have him become the Spectre, and I don't really know where we would see him again, like maybe in the background ever so often, and obviously again in Crisis on Infinite Earths, but that is a pretty cool detail that both of these first movies tease the Crisis already. So next up is Iron Man 2 and its equivalent Arrow 2 or Green Arrow The Promise, which is what I would name the movie. I am giving names to these movies, or at least I came up with names. I haven't given the first two because they don't have names. It would just be Green Arrow and Constantine. Well, this one would be Green Arrow The Promise. Now this season would focus on the episode City of Heroes, Davy Queen. So it would start with the aftermath of the Glades earthquake and Moira going to jail, followed by Three Ghosts, which is where Slade shows up, The Promise, Seeing Red, and Unthinkable. Now, this would have significant changes from the original Season 2, since Seasons 3 and 4, you would later see, they just never happen. Those seasons never occur, because there are not 8 Iron Man movies, there was only 3, so we have to fit all of those, like certain Arrow seasons into just 3 movies, so Season 3 and 4 I'm just skipping completely, but some of the elements of those seasons are being implemented into Season 2. Specifically in Season 2, Oliver, he never becomes the Arrow, he instead just goes straight to becoming the Green Arrow by the end of the movie. In this movie, Roy also becomes Arsenal, like right after being cured of the Mirakuru, he becomes Arsenal. Sarah starts training Laurel in this movie, so in the next one she becomes already Black Canary. Merlin never comes back because there's no time for him to come back, there's no reason to come back, so he stays dead. And because of that, Moira is never freed from prison and instead is found guilty and is only let out of prison when Slade breaks her out in order to kill her. Oliver also does not meet Barry Allen. You can't really have a whole segment of the episode, of the movie rather, dedicated to Barry Allen. So instead, Barry appears in maybe a end credit scene where he is hit by lightning and he becomes the Flash, or at least he is put into a coma, leading into the next movie, which is based off of Thor, which would be The Flash Season 1. So next up, like I said, is Thor, with the equivalent being The Flash Season 1. The episodes that this season would focus on are Pilot Going Rogue, The Man in the Yellow Suit, Out of Time, The Trap, and Fast Enough, as well as Flash vs. Arrow afterwards. So obviously the movie would start with Barry becoming the Flash, waking up from his coma. We don't really spend a lot of time with the storyline before that. We just see a little bit of that in the end credit scene from Arrow The Promise. But it starts with that, then he faces off against the Rogues, specifically Captain Cold and Heatwave. That's when he meets Reverse Flash. Then we also have the storyline of Out of Time, where he faces Weather Wizard and unlocks the ability to time travel, which leads directly into the Trap episode, which is like the whole story is unloaded on us. And finally, the final showdown with the Reverse Flash, which this time around does not include the Arrow and Firestorm. Afterwards, we do see the Singularity without Firestorm being destroyed, instead of in the next movie, because this doesn't lead into the Flash Season 2. Instead, it leads into the next to the Justice League movie or the Avengers movie, so you can't really have that cliffhanger this time around. So instead, we're defeating or destroying the Singularity here, and that leads directly into the Flash teaming up with the Arrow, or at this point even the Green Arrow, as they take down Captain Boomerang together. That would be the first Flash movie, and the changes, while not significant, would definitely have some sort of significance in the universe, because Firestorm still has not debuted. So next up is Captain America the First Avenger, with its equivalent having to be Supergirl Season 1. And this would be pretty simple. There wouldn't really be that many changes to the original Season 1. It would show Supergirl's origin story, how she became Supergirl, maybe a little bit more of her time on Krypton, as well as her facing off against Astra and Anon, and maybe also the introduction to Martian Manhunter. The episodes it would focus on are Pilot, Hostile Takeover, Falling Myriad, and Better Angels, with the minor changes that we do see, including James and Kara never being romantically involved, because that never goes anywhere anyway, as well as Kara and Barry don't meet yet, since they met in Supergirl Season 1, and obviously there's not really going to be much time for that, and they're going to meet in the very next movie, which is the equivalent to the Avengers. So that's when they meet, and they don't meet in Supergirl Season 1, so the changes aren't really significant, but they are there at least. And Supergirl Season 1 is the final movie in the Phase 1 of the Arrowverse cinematic universe that is before the Avengers. So next up is the final Phase 1 movie, as well as probably, definitely the most significant, the Avengers. Now, obviously with the Avengers movies, I'm not going to be replacing them with seasons of the Arrowverse, instead with crossover events, and that also probably includes Captain America Civil War, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But with the Avengers, there is a clear replacement. It's not Flash vs. Arrow, which I implemented already into the Flash, the first Flash movie. It's not Heroes Join Forces, because, Flash vs. Arrow is just two heroes teaming up. Heroes Join Forces is just two superhero teams teaming up, along with maybe Hawkman or Hawkgirl. It's not really a Justice League. However, Invasion, now that is a Justice League team-up. You have 4 superhero groups, the Team Arrow, Team Flash, the Legends, and also Supergirl, teaming up against an alien invasion, while the Avengers was 6 different superheroes teaming up against an alien invasion. It's pretty clear that Invasion is what should replace the Avengers. With that in mind, there would have to be some significant changes. Flash vs. Arrow never happened, so Barry never met the rest of Team Arrow, so they wouldn't really have the rapport they have in Invasion, but they would meet here, so they can develop that here. However, like I said, he did meet Oliver, he did team up with Oliver, so they would have that. Because Hero Joined Forces never happened, however, this is a little bit more significant. The Legends don't exist yet. They don't come together yet. I think you can assume which movie I'm going to be replacing the Legends with, or the first season of Legends of Tomorrow with. So at this point, they don't exist yet, and instead, I'm going to be implementing them in a different way. It also just so happens that since Arrow Season 3 never happened, or that never aired, or we never saw it, then the Atom as a hero does not exist, and Firestorm never appeared in the Flash Season 1. So a good workaround for this is that the Atom and Firestorm, they just debut in this movie. We see their backstories a bit. We see the Atom, how his backstory connects to Arrow the Promise, where his fiancée was killed by a Miracruz soldier. We see Firestorm and how he got his powers from the particle accelerator, how maybe he connects to Caitlin Snow, if he does at all. And that's parts of the origin story in this movie, instead of certain other things like the time travel plot we see at the end of Invasion, which takes up a lot of screen time, which we wouldn't see here because, again, the Legends don't exist. So instead, we would see the origin stories of Firestorm and the Atom, and maybe certain other storylines like Oliver learning about William, which happened in Heroes Joined Forces, so that we wouldn't have time to happen, or it would have to happen here instead. It wouldn't have the whole storyline of Felicity screaming at him for that, but he would learn about William in this crossover. Certain other changes are that heroes like Citizen Steel, Vixen, Heatwave, Jefferson Jackson instead of Ronnie Raven, Wild Dog, Ragman, Mr. Terrific, and H.R. Wells don't appear since they don't exist yet. Well, all the characters that are left, all the characters that appeared in the first couple movies, meaning Green Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, now also Firestorm, the Atom, Black Canary, Arsenal, those characters do appear, and they do form a sort of Justice League that is a little smaller than the original Invasions version, but it is enough. So in between the Flash's first season and Invasion, and in between Arrow the Promise and Invasion as well, there are heroes who maybe become heroes off screen. Like we see some of their origin story in those movies, and we see them beginning their origin stories, like maybe Cisco getting his powers and Laurel starting to train, but it's in between the movies where they do get their names. So by this movie we learn that Cisco is Vibe, and we learn that Laurel is the Black Canary, and I would say that another very significant change has to do with the Dominator's motivation. Since Flashpoint never happened, their original motivation was that since Flashpoint was a thing that could have changed everything, they now see metahumans as a huge threat to their race. Instead of that being because of Flashpoint, they could just be because of the particle accelerator explosion being a scary thing to them, because metahumans are powerful and metahumans are scary. And this time around, the Invasion crossover would happen a lot closer to the particle accelerator explosion happening just like a year later, since The Flash was 2 movies ago. So it would make sense for the Dominators to have been planning their attack ever since then, and they don't really need the added motivation of Flashpoint. One final change I would make to Invasion because of this new structure has to do with the World's Finest crossover, as I would have the crossover implement certain elements from that crossover, because Supergirl and the Flash have yet to meet, and because there's there's a very easy way to implement it within the storyline, as I would have it so that the Flash, like in World's Finest, accidentally runs to Earth 38 by mistake, making it the first time he goes to a different universe, and we don't get to Earth 2 yet even, because the Flash Season 2 has yet to happen, but he goes to Earth 38 by mistake the first time he ever runs to a different universe, and he meets Supergirl. This is when the Dominators mount their attack, because they now see Earth as a defenseless world, since their main hero, the Flash, and their most powerful threat, the Flash, is not there anymore. So the Dominators attack Earth. That's when the Green Arrow, Black Canary, and then even Firestorm and the Atom start fighting the Dominators without the help of the Flash, and the Flash is stuck on Earth 38. He and Supergirl and Martian Manhunter make their way back, and they join the fight, and that's when we see all these things happening. We see, obviously, the Flash and Supergirl meet, and also Martian Manhunter. We see those heroes team up with the other heroes that are already fighting the Dominators, and that's when the Justice League comes together against the Dominators, while implementing also the World's Finest crossover. So this is basically what Phase 1 of the ACU, or the Arrow Cinematic Universe, would have looked like. Arrow, or Green Arrow, and then Constantine, then Green Arrow the Promise, then the Flash, then Supergirl, and finally Justice League Invasion. Now we could see a little bit is the beginnings of the setup for the Crisis, and this is what I would like for this whole thing to be. The Crisis Saga, since the Infinity Saga was what the MCU was in the first 3 phases, then the first 3 phases of the ACU would have also been a saga of sorts, setting up the Crisis. We get the beginnings of that here with Lila Michaels and maybe even the Spectre, but also the introduction of the multiverse through Supergirl and Earth 38, and in Phase 2, we'll be getting a lot more of that with The Flash Season 2, and then also Crisis on Earth X, and things like that. So I'll get to that in the next video when I talk about Phase 2, but for now, this is what I think Phase 1 of the Arrow Cinematic Universe would have looked like. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on everything I talked about in this video. What would you have changed? Which movies would you switch out for which movies? And which seasons would you have used and implemented instead of what I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and stay tuned for my video breaking down what I think the Phase 2 of the Arrow Cinematic Universe would have looked like, followed also by Phase 3. Let me know your thoughts, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.